have this important conversation. You know that high quality childcare provides critical early learning to children. It gives parents the opportunity to fully participate in the workforce. It also is truly the pillar of our economy. Yet, we also know that there's tremendous challenges, both in the supply of childcare and in the ability of parents to access the care. And that's what we're going to do today, is have that conversation. Before we do that, though, I want to point out a few Zoom features that we have that you can utilize during this webinar. If you prefer to listen to the webinar in Spanish, you can switch your audio channel to hear the Spanish interpretation. To turn on this feature, click on Interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen and select Spanish. Also, if you're deaf or hard of hearing, you can click the closed captioning feature. Today, we'll hear from parents and lawmakers about the childcare challenges and how we can build a stronger childcare industry together that meets the needs of children and families. Too many families don't have access to high quality, affordable childcare. And as we know, it has become a much bigger issue during the pandemic. If anything, the pandemic has really exacerbated a lot of the challenges that we had before with supply and affordability. Operating costs for childcare providers are rising at a time when their revenue is decreasing. Many parents who are working only part-time, and so their ability to fully enroll their children in care and to pay for it is now limited. At the same time, childcare providers are confronted with rising costs with PPE, smaller group sizes, and unfortunately, some of them, these small independent businesses, have had to make the hard decision to close their doors. Now more than ever, parents are struggling to afford and access the kind of care that they really know their children need. They want so much for their children. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to two parents from across the country who understand this issue all too well. First, I'd like to introduce you to Dana Harvey. Dana is an accountant and lifestyle blogger with two young girls. She spoke out publicly for the first time in 2020 on this issue by partnering with the Care for All Children campaign. Welcome, Dana.
Thank you for having me.
I'd also like to introduce you to Jessica Balk. Jessica is a Central Iowa volunteer outreach leader with Save the Children Action Network. Driven by her experience as a single mom, a child care provider, and a volunteer in her community, Jessica leverages her story to regularly urge lawmakers to invest in kids and families. Welcome, Jessica. Let's go ahead and start with a question for Dana. Dana, you were raised in a middle-income family. You and your husband are both professionals. What surprised you when you had your first daughter and you and your husband went out and started looking for childcare? What most surprised you about that?
Yeah, so growing up, I went to preschool, but my father was in the military, so it was paid for. My husband, on the other hand, was watched by a family member. So we were both blindsided by the cost of childcare and what was available to us. We both worked full-time jobs, so the cost of childcare hadn't really affected us until we had our first daughter. And we did some research looking around, and we did notice that there were some programs available to help parents put their kids in early education programs, but they were targeted to low-income families. Well, we're a middle-class family, so we found ourselves paying nearly 25% of our take-home pay for affordable, like just quality childcare costs just as much as our mortgage for just one child. So we found ourselves debating whether we pay down our student loans and save up for our daughter's college fund, or we pour all this money into a quality childcare program for her at an early age. So it seemed like we only had three options, whether we struggle to pay each month, have a family member, or one of us quit our jobs.
Yeah, that is so frustrating. I'm not sure people realize, and our listeners today realize that childcare is primarily a private sector service, unlike K-12 and higher education that have a public tax base. Childcare is primarily privately paid. And at the same time, some of the costs for childcare are high because of the delivery, the small group sizes. And of course, we want well-trained providers. So it is a very challenging situation, and I can see where that was surprising to you and your husband, Dana. Let's switch to Jessica. Jessica, what has your childcare situation been like in your community pre and post pandemic? How accessible has it been?
To be honest, we do live in a childcare desert area. So we had already been lacking in childcare availability prior to the pandemic. Um, Many families had to rely on family members to watch their children. They've also had to rely on in-home daycare providers, which a lot of the time are at full capacity. So you're a lot of the time waiting in line for somebody to leave the daycare to be able to have your child join. In which case, that leaves parents without the options to put their children in childcare and or rely on relatives to do that for them. And since the pandemic, it's only increased the need for it because now we've got families who have also been childcare providers and have their own children, but have been providing childcare to the community and had to close their doors because of the pandemic. So as a community, we're struggling as a whole, and it's clearly felt around the state just by talking to several different parents that I've come into conversations with about the same issue.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it's made a strained supply even that much worse.
Exactly.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting when I heard that Iowa is one of the states that has a large number of childcare deserts or places in the state where there just simply was not enough supply. So I can see now where it's even that much more challenging.
Absolutely. Prior to the pandemic, we were at 40%, and I can guarantee if we were to reevaluate that, it'd be even higher.
Yeah. So 40% supply for the need. Yeah, that's just not working. Dana, let's switch back over to you. You were fortunate. Speaking of supply, you actually looked at kind of an interesting supply mode, which was your mother, or was it your mother-in-law? So, I mean, that's phenomenal when you can have a family member care for your kids. But at the same time, I can see where you would be concerned that they're getting the right kind of social interaction and perhaps even the right early learning. So how did you guys as a family address that, and how are you addressing it to this day?
Well, so we are very blessed to have my mother-in-law be our caretaker. And although she's loving and trusting and honestly an amazing caretaker, she doesn't have that early childhood education or childhood education experience in general. So she's not professionally equipped to teach my daughter what she would learn in or obtain by a licensed educator. So I think it's important for our daughter to have a well-balanced mix of formal learning and informal playtime. And I feel like we're going to struggle to integrate her socially into society in general for things like learning to play with others, rules of sharing, how to follow instructions, and other key social lessons. I know that there's a lot of scientific and peer-reviewed studies out there on the importance of early childhood education, and I know that attending such preschools can help lead to higher IQs, better self-esteem, fewer behavioral issues, and so we realize the long-term effect that we're going to have with her on these early childhood education years that she won't have with my mother-in-law.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's such a trade-off when you look at the cost and being able to have a balanced budget for your family. I think you mentioned earlier at one point, childcare was 25% of your budget. So it's really unfortunate that we put young families in this position of having to choose between mortgage, food, and perhaps educational childcare. Jessica, let's flip back over to you. It's been interesting to me to learn about your background and that you're an activist, right? Like you've taken this knowledge that you have of childcare and your passion for making it different for families that come after you. So first of all, thank you for that. I really appreciate your activism. That's something we've discovered in our work, is that how important parent voices are with us and parent stories. So I've heard that you've been out there kind of drumming up some interesting solutions to childcare supply in your community. So I think others might be interested in hearing about it and maybe hearing about the tactics that you've used.
Absolutely. So like I said before, the community that I live in is definitely in the childcare desert. So I was, I've already been using my advocacy through Save the Children Action Network. We've been speaking with lawmakers, trying to get funding up on this, but childcare desert seems to be an ongoing issue. So myself personally, I've got an 8-year-old son who at the time, needed childcare, and there wasn't anything available. So to me, that made me want to do something about it, because not only am I suffering, but all my friends and family members are also suffering from the same issue. So I had put together a proposal to submit to the city council to see if there was something that we could do to address this issue in our community. And I spoke with them, and I spoke with a few other business leaders in the area, and we had come up with an idea to, work with local businesses to see if they would be able to contribute into helping us put together a childcare center that would give us more availability to the children in our area. And that seems to be the biggest issue, is always funding. Is we don't have enough funding from the state and federal level to do something like that. So we have to rely on each other, and we have to rely on businesses to step in. And personally, I don't believe it should be completely on the parents to find a solution for that.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And like I said, I really like the fact, though, that you're looking at some alternatives to pure government funding. I love the idea that you're looking at employers and trying to see what role they could have. If you think about how many employers pay for their employees' healthcare memberships, or they pay for retirement is another great example. Is there a way that we can inspire more employers to think about helping young families and being part of the solution? So I love that. Dina, you're also turning into a bit of an activist, but I love that. And you're using a little bit of a different tactic. You're using social media and your blog to tell the story. And I'm super curious, since you've started doing this through the Care for All Children campaign, what are you experiencing? Are you hearing from other parents? Are others starting to say, oh, I thought I was the only one. It's really great to hear. Or, what are you learning?
Yeah, so one thing I think most people kind of jump into having kids, they don't look at these costs necessarily. I think they get blindsided by these costs once they have children instead of looking into it. I found that majority of the people that reached out to me after I proposed this issue on my blog and reached out and was kind of advocating it through social media, a lot of people reached out to me to tell me their stories, and it seemed like the common trend for the mom to quit their job. So I had a lot of close family friends and family members that had really struggled with this issue. One of my friends actually took out a personal loan to pay for
Wow.
the first year of childcare. A lot of my friends actually realized that they're essentially working to pay for childcare. And so a lot of them actually left their careers that they went to school for. A different situation, but same issue. I had my brother-in-law actually moved closer to his parents because where they wanted to live wasn't they weren't going to be able to afford childcare there, and they needed to depend on a family member to watch over their kids. So I think this is a very common situation where we're all kind of struggling with our young children finding childcare.
Yeah, that's super interesting to me, the way, parents think of this as such a personal and private issue. I think because it has to do with finance, right? And that's not typically something you chat with your friends about. But boy, anything we can do to encourage parents to tell their stories right now is really, really important. We've talked to a lot of lawmakers who say, I don't think this is a problem in my city or state. And that's just simply not true. We haven't found one state that has it perfectly figured out. Although we are going to hear from a governor later on who's doing a lot, so I'm encouraged by that. So Jessica, kind of going back to your activism, and you're taking more of a political route with this, working with Save the Children Action Network. I'm curious about how you're experiencing this issue being bipartisan. From my vantage point, I see on both sides of the aisle a strong interest in trying to help young parents afford childcare. Are you experiencing that? And how important is to you that it is bipartisan?
Yeah, I definitely experienced the same thing. We've seen it time and time and again. We've had Senator Axne, $60 billion in assistance. We had Senator Ernst, $25 billion, advocate for $25 billion in childcare assistance to help childcare providers bounce back from the industry. We've had Reynolds also, and it's just, I've seen it from both sides of the ballpark. We've got, it's clearly not a partisan issue. There's clear evidence of that. The issue is that we've got kids who don't have high quality childcare, and families are suffering from that, and children are suffering from that. We've got Iowa Women's Foundation and other community groups are looking for community childcare solutions all the time. They're also a nonpartisan organization. There's Save the Children Action Network, nonpartisan. We're all working for the same common goal, and that is to make sure our children have a better future. So to me, yeah, there's plenty of evidence to prove that it's not a partisan issue.
Great, and I'm really happy that you're seeing it playing out, because certainly the polling shows us that this isn't a nonpartisan issue. It's across red-blue states quite equally. Our work with Care for All Children, we've seen as much interest from far right to far left. So it's really up to us as advocates to harness that bipartisan momentum and try to affect change with it. So I'm pleased that you're hearing that. Any closing comments, Dana or Jessica, before we move on?
I don't believe so.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you guys so much. I mean, there's just absolutely no way we could do this without your stories, your voices, and your energy. So I really appreciate you joining us today. It was a great conversation, and definitely inspires me. So we're going to shift to the different portion of our webinar, which is more of the lawmaker portion, in a minute. But before that, I just want to bring to your attention, if you're feeling inspired, if you want to take action, we want you to join us. So the Care for All Children campaign, as we said, is a bipartisan effort to lift up childcare access and affordability to the presidential candidates. We have a petition going, and we're seeing tremendous momentum with that. So I really encourage you to take a few seconds, sign that, add your name to that petition. You can do that in the chat box. There's a link to it, or you can also go to the Care for All Children website and do that. There really has never been a more important time for us to work on this. Many of us have been working on this issue for quite a while and believe deeply in it. But certainly the pandemic has just, as I said, laid bare a lot of the fragileness of this sector. The fact that we didn't have enough supply to begin with, and the fact that parents were challenged to pay for it. Unfortunately and sadly, that has only gotten worse this spring and summer. We would like to show you a brief video that talks a little bit more about this and talks about how it's affecting parents. We'll switch to that now.
For the families that I see, I mean, I've seen them affected in so many different ways. Parents who are having to work from home, but their kids are at home, and trying to balance what that looks like.
I think the worst impact on the families, my family in general, is not having the kids in school or childcare.
I know that parents are overwhelmed with having to be there to monitor and help them do the work, especially since they don't have a frame of reference for any of the stuff that's going on. And if they're not technologically savvy, this can really be a stressor.
I have other families who have lost their jobs and aren't able to work. So the stress of how they're gonna financially kind of get through the day is very real.
When I look at this mother, and she's got 3 children, and they're all under 5, and she's needing childcare, so she can go to work, okay? And I can't provide help, and I can't then something's wrong with our country, because everybody should be given that opportunity.
It's shown fears and frustrations on a level that I don't think anybody was prepared for, particularly when it comes to the government saying that they're going to close K through 12, but then for some strange reason, childcare wasn't even thought of.
Parents are dropping their kids off at the door. They're not going into the facilities. All of this stresses the provider, the parents, and the children are feeling it.
A lot of work right now is also with parents on helping them recognize and regulate their anxiety around this, because particularly young kids look to their parents for how to react and respond.
Thank you. And thank you for your patience with our video. It's always, these are interesting times with all of this virtual communication. So I appreciate your patience with that. Couple of important things though that I heard in that video, I mean, from providers themselves who are really feeling like they wish they could do more. If their group sizes have been cut down, it pains them as much as it is painful for parents. And then also at the systems level, some of the frustrations with the fact that, we can't do more right now for young families. So that really leads us to talking to our elected officials and lawmakers. And we definitely see this conversation today being 2 sides of a coin. From one side, we have parents who are living it, breathing it, experiencing it. We have advocates like Jessica who had lived it, and now they're willing to put in the time and energy to change it for those that come after, which is super powerful. And then we also have our current lawmakers. And just to give a little frame of reference before I introduce Representative Lupus from Florida, who's going to kick us off, sort of a frame of reference is that most childcare funding is at the state and local level. The federal government certainly puts a huge amount of dollars into it, but actually the policies and how those dollars get out to the childcare sector is state and even local. So that's why whenever we have any kind of lawmaker discussion when it has to do with childcare, we try to include at the federal level what's happening, which is obviously the president's right now with this RNCC associated event. the states, and then even down to the local level. So today we're going to be, we're really fortunate to be able to be joined by lawmakers at multiple levels. And Representative Vance Lucas from Florida, I'm really, really pleased, happy to introduce him. What's super interesting about Vance that I want you guys all to know is that he is leading the sort of on the champion side. He is the CEO of the Florida Children's Movement, which is one of the premier children's advocacy organizations in the country. So he's doing that, he understands that, but at the very same time, he made a really important decision to become an elected official. So he is a representative. And so I just love that he wears both of those hats and can speak to us today from both of those positions. Prior to joining the children's movement, Vance was both a civil litigator and the legal services. He was with the legal services with the Greater Miami Homeless Project. He is a proud alum of the University of Miami, and he lives in Miami with 3 young daughters and his wife. So thank you so much for joining us today, Vance. I'm going to turn it over to you and have you kick off the lawmaker portion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sue. It's great to see you. I hope everyone is having an incredible day. It is very hot here in Miami this afternoon, but feeling very blessed and very grateful to participate. As Sue said, I have the privilege of serving as the CEO of the Children's Movement of Florida, which is an organization that has been in existence for 10 years with really one singular focus, which is to elevate the conversation around early childhood education, children's health access, and support for families. And our organization was launched 10 years ago in the summer of 2010 on the back of a countywide referendum in my community to essentially create a Children's Services Council, which was a taxing district that would allocate resources to early intervention and prevention programs across our county. What that district has meant over the last 10 years is more than $1 billion going back into our community. And when that referendum went to ballot in 2008, it passed with 85.4% of support. And it was really out of that overwhelming victory that we said, we should be able to do something across the state. We should be able to engage the electorate, engage the business leaders, engage the elected officials around a narrative for young children. So we have worked across every corner of Florida. And for those of you who've been to Florida, we're a fairly large state. If you look geographically from the tip of the Florida Keys to Pensacola is actually a longer distance than it is from Pensacola to Chicago. A very fast growing state. We have north of around 21 million people, very dynamic economy. And again, we've sort of stepped into a space of really prioritizing early learning, but there are still many deficits that we have not tackled. Florida has one of the country's only universal pre-K programs, but we have not, we are spending less today on our pre-K program than we were in 2005 when it first started. So there's a lot that we have to do. And, my narrative for the last 10 years has always been that if you really care about education reform, if you really believe that the singular focus of education is student outcomes, then you have to focus on the early childhood piece. In our state, and I'm interested to hear Governor Little, but in our state, we permit 43% of students to go into formal school, quote, not ready to be there. And my wife was a former kindergarten teacher. She could tell you in the first week which students were going to thrive and which were going to struggle, and that is a major obstacle for us to get to a point where we can say that every child has the opportunity to thrive in Florida. So, after about 7 or 8 years of going to Tallahassee every year on the advocate side, I ultimately, I was going every year and we were championing these policies. I just got very frustrated because while I saw progress, I didn't see transformation. And I knew that there was an urgency to these issues that other people weren't feeling. That in Florida, that 43% of students not being ready meant that there were 90,000 students every single year going into our public school system already behind. And, you know, in a country as prosperous and generous as ours, you know, that was not permissible to me. So I took the time, I talked with a lot of people. I talked with, you know, former House speakers. I talked to Governor Bush, and I said, am I crazy to think that if I were to run for the Florida legislature, that I could be sort of one voice for young children? And it was actually Governor Bush who said, you know, Vance, that's actually the only thing that's ever changed the system, is one person who is willing to sort of stand up to everybody else because of an issue that they so believe in. So I ran for office in 2018. You know, politics can be a very tough sport. It's not always fun. But what I've found is that if you believe wholeheartedly in what you're doing and why you're doing it, then you can put up with a lot of the nonsense that comes with politics. And, you know, thankfully won my election in 2018 and have had the opportunity to really champion issues in the Florida legislature around early childhood education. You know, seeing a $10 million increase in our voluntary pre-K program last year. I carried a bill my first year that expanded pathways for professional development for our early childhood teachers, who in our state make on average about $9.70 per hour. So, you know, giving them opportunities to grow in their career, expanding music education for young children. But I'll tell you this, and I'll be totally honest, we had a really remarkable bill this past year that would have totally revolutionized our VPK program, putting into place accountability measures that have not existed for 15 years. And while we got it through our chamber in the House, it ultimately ended up dying in the Senate, simply because it was not a significant enough priority. And, you know, what that means in reality is that we will have another 175,000 children go through our pre-K program without any real accountability infrastructure. And again, to me, that is entirely unacceptable. So, you know, our commitment for the years to come is really about making sure that early childhood is a consistent part of that education reform conversation. And, you know, Sue has heard me say this many times. I had the privilege of actually going out to Colorado to, you know, Mr. Mirage's house and meeting with Governor Polis and talking about these issues. And I think at the end of the day, you know, our elected leaders need to care about this issue, but this needs to be an issue that our business community gets behind, that they understand that this is not only about, you know, the moral good of today of supporting children, but this is about our workforce. That the children who are sitting in our VPK classrooms today, they are our workforce of, you know, 2035. And how are we preparing them? And, you know, that is the conversation that we're trying to have in Florida. And that's why I'm so grateful to be a part of this today and have a chance to talk to Governor Little from Idaho and hear what they're doing. And, you know, really hope that we can start to open the eyes of elected officials across the state, because I don't think there's any more important issue, you know, at the core of prosperity in America than early childhood education. All the data suggests it. And, you know, at the end of the day, our responsibility is to make these issues politically viable so that our elected officials get behind it. So with that, I would like to introduce and welcome Governor Brad Little from the great state of Idaho. Governor Little, great to see you, sir. Governor Little was elected governor in 2019 after serving in his state Senate since 2001. Governor, I hear that you are in the sheep and cattle ranching industry. If you ever want me to come out there and help, I don't know anything about sheep and cattle other than sometimes we have meat at home, but would love to come out there and help you out. I've been told that you have 2 sons. I have 3 daughters. So, you know, we can talk about that. And I read on Wikipedia, it says you have 5 grandchildren, but in the notes that I got from Sue, it says you have 6 grandchildren. So who's right, Governor?
The latter number is correct. Okay. We have 6 grandchildren that from 10 months to 10 years.
Fantastic. So we've got to talk to the Wikipedia folks because they're missing out on one of the grandchildren. And my guess is the 10-month-old is probably your favorite.
And she's actually very well behaved for a 10-month-old, so we're very delighted. Not all of them fall into that category.
That's yeah. No, I have a 2-year-old who we've been potty training through the pandemic, which has been very, very exciting. She refuses to wear clothes. So Governor, I'll jump right in and we can have this conversation. But I'm very grateful that someone at your level, at the executive level, is prioritizing early childhood in your state. It's something that we've been eager to see in Florida. And our current governor, Ron DeSantis, has really taken charge and identified some of the issues we've had in early learning. But, clearly this pandemic has had an overwhelming impact on early childhood education. And what we're seeing in Florida is that it's not only the financial impact of parents not wanting to send their children back to childcare and therefore centers having depressed enrollment rates, but also the challenge of the CDC guidelines saying that, you can only have 10 students in a room, and, what that means for private childcare providers who oftentimes are operating at very slim margins. So we have a very serious dynamic in our state in terms of how we're going to help our early childhood industry, over the next 6 months move through this pandemic. Because as I said early on, this is all about the workforce of today, making sure that parents can go to work, but it's also about the workforce of tomorrow. You identified childcare providers as essential workers and essential industries when the pandemic hit. Could you talk a little bit about why you saw the connection between childcare and the workforce?
Well, when the pandemic first hit, the first thing we did was reach out to the healthcare industry, and the healthcare industry identified that we have the second or third lowest number of doctors per resident of any state. Idaho is a very large, not very populated state, and we don't have very many doctors, and we don't have a lot of healthcare. We sure don't have a surplus. And the fact that the schools were closing at a rapid rate, and I had critical healthcare workers that were not showing up to work because they're taking care of their children. We identified that, right? That was a critical healthcare component. But more importantly, it was the right thing to do. Full disclosure, Idaho is one of the few states that doesn't require pre-K. But the last 2 years, we put a substantial amount of money into early childhood, and the school districts are implementing pre-K without a state mandate. And some of them are lowering the ratio of teachers in kindergarten, and some of them are doing other things. But our rate of adoption of pre-K has gone way up. And of course, one of the ways to have those kids prepared is to have childcare that's more than just watching the kids, it's preparing the kids. And literacy has been one of my top priorities.
Governor, have you seen the same challenges that we've seen in Florida with your childcare providers being able to stay open in spite of the depressed enrollment and the guidelines? And
absolutely. In fact, we've got grants available for them, and a lot of PPE that we made available for them in our conversations that we've had statewide with the people that operate these facilities. But no, it's a real problem. And now that school started, it's even a bigger problem. You as a business person, if you've got a child care facility, you staff up for a certain number of kids, and all of a sudden schools close down, and you might have more, you might have less. So the uncertainty that always existed out there is even really exacerbated as we try and get our arms around what our back to school policy is going to be, or what's going to take place. And we don't know, because we're basically allowing the science to guide us. And if we have a big outbreak, schools will be closed down. And in many instances, that's less people. And it just disrupts the business model of a lot of our high quality daycare providers.
And Governor, so do you feel like Idaho is looking at these issues? Obviously, one of the things I've told a lot of people is that for the last 10 years, my conversation has always been about early learning is about the workforce of tomorrow. Understanding the sort of the practical imperative of making sure that people have a place where their children can be safe during the day. But do you feel, I would say one thing before I ask the question, this whole pandemic has brought me back to an understanding that, as I said, it's also about the workforce of today, that this is an essential piece to our reopening as a state. Do you feel as though, your legislature and the business community in Idaho are looking at it through both lenses of both the workforce of today and the workforce of the future?
Well, our largest business group, it's their number one priority. They're about their number one priority. they realize, the people that own those businesses, that operate those businesses, as we started the pandemic, we had the third lowest unemployment rate in the nation. Today, again, we have the third lowest unemployment rate in the nation. But one of the real limitations is having quality, affordable, accessible daycare all over the state. And so we're kind of doing everything. We're giving grants to these facilities, and we're really urging businesses to be competitive, to implement high quality daycare. And in a labor market like we had in February, and we're getting closer to get real quality employees, having good daycare for your employees is critical.
Yeah, just so you know, the situation that we were seeing in Miami-Dade, Governor, we got to a point in the height of the pandemic here where north of 80% of our childcare was closed. And there were very, very few options for families. And one of the things that I pushed was to ensure that we had emergency childcare for first responders and for healthcare workers. And one of the things that the state did was create essentially a voucher for any healthcare worker, any police officer, firefighter who was being called to the front lines of the pandemic, to ensure that they were able to find a center that would be able to take care of their child for the day so that they could fight the pandemic. And I think that was a major struggle that we saw here, because we've really seen, especially in Miami-Dade, a significant impact from the pandemic. So
one of our biggest barometers of our success with the COVID virus is healthcare capacity. And if they're not showing up because they're taking care of their kids, that's just like them being out with the COVID virus or anything else.
Absolutely. So, Governor, I want to congratulate you because my understanding is that Idaho received a preschool development grant, a PDG, that you applied for. And my understanding is this is the first one that Idaho has received. Talk to me a little bit about what your longer term vision is for early childhood and early learning in Idaho.
Well, I mean, ultimately, my goal is all kids reading proficiently by the end of the third grade. And to build that out, I got to go back down the food chain to where the problems are. I think you said 43% of your kids weren't ready. I think half. I think it's 50% in Idaho. But those numbers are a little old because they don't reflect a lot of the new pre-K programs that we've been implementing. But a lot of them are very early programs. And of course, a really good early childhood learning, you just don't stand a big one up overnight, because those kind of take special people, particularly if you want a really good one, to where you've got the right kind of skill set for those professionals that are in those, whether they be daycare or whether they be in pre-K facilities. So that's all part of the mosaic of what we're doing to get all these kids reading proficiently by the end of the third grade.
Yeah, I'm actually really, really pleased to hear you use the third grade reading piece, because, for a lot of people, for folks who don't think of early childhood as an essential piece of the education continuum, it's that third grade reading score that is really definitive of how a child is going to perform. And what I frequently do is I'll tell folks, in Florida, we have 43% of students who aren't ready for kindergarten. We have about 45% of third graders who aren't reading it proficiently. We have about 44% of 10th graders who can't read at proficiency. So you can draw a straight line from, the experience and the reality for that child in early learning all the way to, through high school. And, the fact that Idaho's business community is getting behind this, I don't think, and I am an advocate, so I can say this, I don't think the advocate community wins this fight. I think at the end of the day, this will be a fight that the business community wins, because at the end of the day, people understand that this is not just about, again, the moral imperative, that this is a really essential piece to ensuring that, Idaho is competitive in 20, 25, 30 years.
Well, so, I think I can't remember who I stole it from, but the line that I used in the State of the State was, I would rather prepare kids than I would repair kids. And I stole it from somebody, so they got the credit back. But that's really a big deal in Idaho. And because of the very, very independent nature of Idahoans, I've had to convince a lot of people that even though you're the best parent and you got the best grandparents and you got the best your kids and your grandkids have got a great opportunity. The speed at which they're able to learn all the way through the K-12 system and even above is basically you have to teach to the entire classroom, and the bigger that gap is, the harder it is for your perfect student from Lake Wobegon, for your perfect student to advance. So, and I'm really concerned in this pandemic where we've got class starting and then class not going, and we had classes out last fall, is that gap, which we always wrestle with, gets larger, because it's not only those kids that just don't have the same opportunities as some other kids, it's everybody in the classroom.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And my biggest fear for this pandemic from an education standpoint is that this will, without question, expand the opportunity gap. There will no question be significant challenges for students who don't have all the resources available to them because of, in Florida right now, all of our systems for the most part are being done virtually. And it is a very difficult dynamic, especially for younger children who don't interface on a digital platform the way they do one-on-one. So, all right, Governor. So this is going to be, we're going to try this. Technology hopefully permits it, but I'm going to ask one of your constituents would like to ask you a question, and her name is Angie Tweet. So I will turn it over to the Zoom gods, and hopefully we can hear from Angie.
Hello, Governor.
Hi, Angie.
My name's Angie, as Vance introduced me, Representative Vance, and I teach kindergarten at Julietta Elementary School for the Kendrick School District. And in recent years, it's been tough for me. I've seen students coming in, starting off further and further behind where they would be if they were ready to learn. So since the beginning of your term, you've had an eye on early childhood education as a priority to make sure students are better ready for my classroom for kindergarten and ready to read. And I thank you for that. Can you talk about what you would like to see done differently here in Idaho, and especially rural Idaho, to better prepare our young students?
Well, it took us a few years, but we have finally agreed on what we call our, as you well know, Angie, our IRI, our reading measurement, that we test those kids when they're going into kindergarten, test them multiple times. It's not perfect, but there's a pretty good consensus among educators that it's a good measurement. When we got to that point, now I have a ruler. Now I have a way to measure the performance. It's not perfect, but if I put capital into the school districts or into daycare, what I expect to see is those numbers go up, so that they're reading proficiently at the end of the third grade. So based on that measurement criteria, we want to put resources into those areas and encourage the school districts, the industry that's providing daycare, everybody in the district, all putting their shoulder to the wheel and getting those scores for all kids. I don't want anybody to fall through the gap, for all kids to be proficient at the end of the third grade with their reading scores. And we've got a pretty good measurement now to do that.
So Governor, well, Angie, thank you so much. I'm glad that the Zoom worked. Governor, my question is this, because from my vantage point, obviously I serve in the legislature, and part of my responsibility is convincing the executive office that early childhood should be a priority. And I'm very grateful to the governor's office and the commissioner of education, because they have prioritized early childhood. What has the dynamic been like in Idaho in terms of, does the legislature support these issues? Have you seen, from your time in the state Senate, was this an issue that you saw being discussed then? What has the progression been, and do you think there is an appetite across the entire political landscape for increased investment and public policy?
Well, it wasn't easy to triple, quadruple our investment in literacy. It was not easy. It was one of my biggest priorities in my state of the state. and it continues to be a high priority for me. But I'll go back to my argument, and that's that having all these kids at the same level when they get to the third grade means that it's advantage to everybody. And industry agrees with me. Obviously, the education community, even the IEA, the Idaho Teachers Association, they know that their job's a lot easier the more prepared they are. That 50% number is just absolutely an anchor around educational attainment for everybody. So anything I can do, in daycare, I can do a pre-K, I can do in any of these other programs, I can do with businesses providing daycare, that moves that number up to where we can get to a more level playing field. Basically the starting line, which is the first day of the fourth grade.
And Governor, I would say this, I can't underscore enough how important it is, the fact that you call out these issues in your state of the state, that is a major step forward for this issue, because I think a lot of times, again, in Florida, these issues were never on the forefront, and our push has always been for, the governor to champion it, or the state chamber of commerce. So, I celebrate you hugely for, in your executive capacity, talking about these issues. Now, for both of us as elected officials, obviously, you're talking to constituents. How would you advise, folks who are listening today to engage with, their elected members, their governors, their state legislators to really make sure that early childhood is a priority in their state?
Well, if I were in Florida today at the convention that's not there, it would be my fourth Republican convention in the state of Florida. I know I don't look that old, but it would have been my fourth. But we Republicans, and everybody believes in opportunity. You can't have opportunity for everyone if they don't get to that starting line of life. Condoleezza Rice, matter of fact, the last time I was in Florida at Tampa, addressed us, one of the Bush programs they had at the convention, and talked about, education is a civil rights issue of this generation. And it really is. If you want opportunity, and everybody believes in opportunity, in Idaho, as in most states, it's in our Constitution. We have an obligation for a free, uniform, thorough system of public schools. You can't have uniform and thorough education if kids can't read, and that's why. And we know the development. The science has really been around for a long time. It gets recharged every so often, but the development that takes place in these children's minds when they're 4, 5, and 6, and 7, I see my grandkids learning more in a week. Well, of course, the legislature's here, so that kind of is a brain drain on me sometimes, but that's for another discussion. But I see my grandkids learning more in a week than I can learn in a long time. And it's the place to put the money. It's the place to put the resources.
Absolutely. And I see it, I think I was blessed. My wife and I found out we were pregnant with our first daughter. I left the practice of law to go into this work 10 years ago. I left a job with a great salary, bonus, all of these, trappings of being an attorney, to take a job as an independent contractor that way I was only guaranteed 3 months. And if I didn't perform, then in 3 months I would be gone. And I lost my health care. It was really a fairly stressful time. And then we find out the next week we were pregnant with our first daughter. And it's been an important inflection point for me, or reflection point, because I've had the opportunity to see her grow. And I oftentimes use them as examples for, what the opportunities that I think, we should want for every child. I believe to my core that every parent loves their child as much as I love my own girls, as much as you love your boys and your grandchildren. Oftentimes parents just may not know what to do. For me as a parent, for you as a parent, for your children and your boys as parents, my guess is your boys are probably pretty good parents because they had great parents and they mimicked a lot of what you guys did with them. I think a lot of times, some of the good things and some of the bad things I may do as a parent are just me mimicking what I've seen at home or what I hear from my friends. And, I think for us, we need to constantly understand that we have to support parents, support families, continue to elevate this conversation. I have one last question for you, and this was one that came in through the chat. So obviously, this is a dynamic we have in Florida as well. Being a state that has strong urban cores and then rural areas. What's the dynamic that you're seeing in early learning as it relates to your rural communities and some of your more heavily populated communities?
Well, it's diverse. In the eastern part of the state, there's kind of a different superstructure in the community than there is in the northern part of the state. So what I want to do in one part of the state is a little different than others. And that's why the school boards, which we have 115 school districts and about 60 or 70 charters, we're trying to put them in charge of how do you take resources, move the needle on that IRI, which is all kids reading proficiently at the end of the third grade, and where do you put the resources? And they just keep picking over and over, whether it be in Kendrick or whether it be in Boise or wherever it is, high quality pre-K class, which we just didn't have a lot of. We're increasing by thousands of % a year the amount of pre-K that's available. And that's without a mandate from the legislature. That's allowing the local community to make the determination. This whole pandemic is going to open up a lot of opportunities because there are going to be more people working from home in a lot of industries. There's going to be more remote delivery of education. And what I want to see is really good quality programs available for our daycare providers so that they can help me identify those kids in the school district that need the help, put resources into those areas to help them, whether it's a private daycare, whether it's a business daycare, or whether it's our pre-K program we have in with our districts.
Well, Governor, I got to say this. You are an inspiration to me. I appreciate you more than you know. And again, to have individuals at the top of our state governments who understand these issues, care about these issues, but are also working to ensure that every child in their state has the opportunities that they would want for their own children is exactly the kind of leadership that we need. As soon as my wife lets me get back on a plane, I'm going to come visit you in Idaho. So make sure there is a sheep there that I can take the wool off of. But I truly appreciate you, sir, for being with us today. Again, we will stand with you in this fight because at the end of the day, we need to get to the top of the mountain because our children are depending on us. I want to thank everybody for participating today. In the chat box, I'm being told that there is an opportunity to sign for the Care for All Children's petition that Sue had recently spoken about. And I just want to thank David and Laura Mirage and their foundation, Care for All Children campaign, Save the Children, and Save the Children Action Network for bringing the speakers together today. I can't stress and underscore enough that this issue is at the very center of the future of our nation, and I'm grateful that we've had the opportunity to talk about it today. I hope all of you have a blessed Tuesday, and I hope to see you all soon.